We are making it live at last. Hello, my name is Julie Hirschberg, the owner founder of Reactive Therapy and Wellness here in the Los Angeles area, and joining you live on Fridays to share a little bit about what we are learning and doing. And particularly this week, as you know, we do a lot of free trainings to the world, to people with neurologic disorders, to other healthcare providers, because we're very passionate about growing people's understandings of different disorders, particularly some of the more rare or misunderstood disorders, neurologic disorders, because I'm a neuro-PT, this is our practice, neurologic therapy practice. So today, I want to talk about functional neurologic disorders, or FND, because this is one of the most misunderstood disorders. It has a very long history of not being well understood. And we are doing a free workshop for healthcare providers. And again, this is because I think every healthcare provider should have the tools to help somebody with functional neurologic disorders. So we're doing a free workshop. It's coming up September 13th. It's in the evening, it's live, but you can catch the recording. And it really is sharing some of those kind of secrets to success, to helping somebody manage functional neurologic disorders. So you can sign up for that, by the way. It's at reactiveeducation.com/FND workshop. And I have, as usual, every time we do a workshop or a course or anything, or just literally in general, I'm always reading. I love reading, but I love reading scientific articles and reviews. And sometimes I go down rabbit holes, and a particular rabbit hole I have been going down ever since the Functional Neurologic Disorders Society meeting is really in kind of the neuroscience world and this idea of the predictive brain. And I've talked a little bit about some of these concepts, but I wanted to go into a little bit more detail and kind of do a series actually on these. There have been a few articles recently talking about this idea. And one of these articles, I have honestly read it 4 times so far, and seen a couple people talk about some of these concepts, and they're still frankly hard for me to understand. And I'm still wrapping my brain around it, but I have been so excited looking at some of these things because they get to the underlying mechanisms. And I think mechanisms are really, really important when it comes to understanding disorders that aren't well understood. Is, you know, there's a growing body of literature and understanding on the mechanisms, and the mechanisms take us directly to assessment and treatment. And so what I want to talk about today is really about one of those potential mechanistic features of functional neurologic disorders, and that is this idea of the brain as a predictor. So I want to start with a couple of definitions, because I think this will set the stage for this idea. And I'm going to actually pull up the article. So one of the key articles that I have really, really loved reading, like I said, I keep reading it over and over to try to understand it. It's called The New Science of Emotion, Implications for Functional Neurologic Disorder. The first author is, I met him at the Functional Neurologic Disorders Society conference, and he's a visiting fellow from Germany at Mass General. So Johannes Gilligens, I probably totally butchered that name. Really great person that I met, but really interesting work here. And it builds off of some of the work and theoretical perspectives that Lisa Feldman Barrett also shared at the Functional Neurologic Disorder Society. And she has a great TED Talk. By the way, I'll put a link to it. If you're not on our newsletter, I'll put a link to our TED Talk because it was really helpful in rethinking how we think about emotion. So really, this article took that work, Lisa Feldman Barrett and colleagues' work, and applied it to functional neurologic disorder. New science of emotion. Was published in Brain just very recently. I want to say just in June, but in August in the print edition. So some of the key concepts to kind of start with from like a brain standpoint is this idea of allostasis. So I want to actually read the definition from their article, because I think this is really, really helpful, because it's in terms of energy management. So basically, they describe that energetic supply and demand of the body is managed through this idea of allostasis. So this is, they define the active process of forecasting. So that's important. Forecasting, that's predictive, right? So forecasting the energetic needs of the body by modeling the body in the world and trying to meet those needs before they manifest. This is really, really important. This is kind of where we're going to be with part one, is Lisa Feldman Barrett's work focuses on the idea of the brain as a energy manager, as a primary function, and doing that in a predictive way actually saves energy in many ways, right? So we don't just respond in the moment. Many of our responses and reflexes are much too fast for that. They're predicted, is what she would argue, and that is because one of the main purposes of the brain is to help with this energy supply and demand. So with allostasis, they share, there's a model in the brain to help prepare the body's next action plan based on past experiences. And this is implemented within our central nervous system, within our brain. And so this is, now they go into a lot of detail about predictive processing theories, but I think to kind of keep it simple for those of us that are not neuroscientists like myself, those of us that are therapists, and just really trying to practically make this helpful for the people that we work with. We're really, I think this idea of predictive processing really comes back to allostasis. So I found this particular idea of a lot of help in understanding what might occur in functional neurologic disorders. Now, I want to share a couple of the figures from this article. So this is why I'm on my Zoom, so I could share my screen. And I literally have just the article here for you. So the theory of constructed emotion in FND. And this particular picture, I think, helps set the framework of what does this really mean? So the example of having kind of a mental representation of an apple. So you have this concept, your brain makes a prediction about it. So allostasis, this model of the body and the world, your brain makes a prediction and categorizes this, right? So we see the green, and you can kind of see, I really love the colors down here, because like different shades help you kind of categorize, is it a Granny Smith? Is it a Red Delicious, right? So you categorize that, you get sensory input, right? So visual input, maybe even like smell, if that's part of it. And that helps solidify your concept. You might get some prediction errors too that help give you feedback to further solidify that prediction that you made. So this general concept of having predictions that help kind of maintain this allostasis of the model of the body in the world. You make that prediction, a categorization, you get back sensory input, and prediction errors help solidify that concept. So the argument here is the same things happen with emotion. And now we could spend the whole rest of the day talking about the theory of constructed emotion. And I don't have time. We don't all have time. We should all sit down and talk about this another time, though, for sure. Because it's really interesting. But again, in our newsletter, I will send out a link to her TED Talk. I think it gives a really great intro to that. And she has a couple of books out as well that I highly recommend. But the idea of that the same thing happens with emotions. So emotions not being something that happened to you, but that are, kind of like this apple. They're a concept that we learn and learn to categorize very early on. Now, one of the things that we know in functional neurologic disorders is that it's not only a disorder of emotion or a psychological disorder. We know that is true. But we also do know that, like many other disorders, a history of adverse childhood events can potentially predispose or worsen some of these outlook with functional neurologic disorders. And so one of the things that authors were really looking at, well, why is that? And that's where this theory and the application comes into play. And so I just want to share, excuse the scrolling here, this picture. So this is the theory of constructed emotion. And then the third is to look at how FND, how this relates to functional neurologic disorders. So just like the apple, we have allostasis, we have interoception, so that ability to kind of feel what's inside of our body. We make predictions. So based on some emotion concepts that have developed, and we categorize that. We get sensory feedback, which kind of gives us feedback about that concept in the form of a prediction error. And then there's this idea, just like the apple, maybe if you had not tasted many apples or seen many apples, maybe you had only seen one kind, you wouldn't have an emotion concept or much granularity. And I'm sorry, I went from the apple to the emotion. You wouldn't have a very much granularity in the types of apples that you might categorize as. So let's say you've only ever seen Granny Smith. That is all you know. Your emotion concept is, and your fruit, your apple concept is very small. So similar with emotion is when you experience or even like see something, if you hadn't had those emotion concepts, if they hadn't been learned, you might have a very small granularity of emotion versus a person that might experience something from alarm to agitated, upset, distressed, to frightened, to panic, right? So a person potentially could only know an emotion as panic, right? And not all of the other degrees of that or granularity of that. What I really love is that this really overlaps with some of that great work from Brene Brown too, about even having words and which help us understand emotion concepts, right? For emotion. So that was a big part of her last book, Outlets of the Heart. So lots of overlap. That's why I love this stuff, because it's like multiple things that I've been reading or learning about coming together and just giving us a broader understanding. So I'm going to go down to, excuse the scrolling here, the last piece here. So the theory of constructed emotion in terms of functional neurologic disorders. So let's go from A to B to C here. So we'll start with A, inefficient allostasis. So this is something that we do know can occur in functional neurologic disorder, chronic energy mismanagement, leading to fatigue. Fatigue is a very common factor in functional neurologic disorders, as well as hyperarousal states, among many other symptoms. So this is kind of that starting point, inefficient allostasis. Second, this is not everybody's experience, but there is a subset of people with FND that do have adverse life experiences. And so this can lead to limited or even lack of that granular emotion concept, just like we saw with the apple, right? So so A, inefficient allostasis, subgroup of people that might have adverse life experiences. And then C, so incoming sensory input. I actually think this is a really big one. Incoming sensory input can match a prediction that does not have emotion content, and a body illness category is constructed. So, for example, you're experiencing tremor. You don't have the emotion concept of tremor as I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm fearful. And so instead, because you don't have that predicted in the brain, that actually gets categorized as there's a body illness. So there's something wrong here. Now, I want to pause here because, again, I don't actually think this is the case for every body tremor. This is a potential theoretical perspective for a subset of people who may not have this emotion concept and prediction there. So they may have tremor actually as a concept of a body illness. Now, this is really common, particularly if you are like me and you're around other people with tremor, and it means something. It means Parkinson's or something like that. So instead of maybe having an emotion concept, you have a body concept. It would be normal to have that for sure. So the other thing is that I would also argue that for some folks, the incoming sensory input is maybe incorrect. Maybe they don't have the correct input. And so then you can imagine that would also lead to prediction errors. So deficits in sensory processing, so this is where that comes in, interoception, biased attention, impairments in motor learning, limit the use of precise signals. This is why we need a team, right? So we need a team to be able to tease apart, well, is there a sensory issue? Is there sensory integration issue? Thank you, OT. Is there altered interoception? Thank you, yoga therapy. Thank you, OT. Thank you, psychology. Is there a low emotion concept? Thank you, psychology. Are there motor control issues? Are there biologic issues? Thank you, physical therapy. Literally, I think this sums up why you truly need an integrated team to help get down to the underlying issue in functional neurologic disorder. And I think this particular paper really helps highlight the some of those pieces. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. I know that's kind of heavy. I will tell you, I've been reading this article for a while and I was like, this is a lot. This is a lot. So I am going to do a part 2 and probably a part 3 next week on this topic as well. But I hope I kind of just like whetted your appetite for thinking about the predictive brain and how this influences how we think about inputs and the construction or the concepts that exist for a person, and then how we might explore those both in assessment, and then first we have to assess it. We need to understand if it's there and then bring that into treatment. Honestly, I think this is such an important piece of understanding functional neurologic disorders, and a real reason why integrated care is so important. So stay tuned. Again, we have a workshop coming up September 13th. You can sign up for that at reactiveeducation.com/FND workshop. This is for healthcare providers. We also have some great resources if you're a person with a functional neurologic disorder or a family member of somebody. Join our newsletter. I'll send out all the links, all the resources, all these videos from this week, and you can share those with your healthcare providers. Our main purpose is to spread the word so that more people have access to care of people that understand functional neurologic disorders. So thank you so much for joining me today for what's a very interesting conversation in functional neurologic disorders. I so appreciate you. Please reach out to me for questions. I won't always have the answers, and I'll let you know that too. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.